This is your urgent call to action. We are all called to lead in a world in chaos, crisis, and turmoil. Join a pivotal global movement for change to transform the leadership crisis worldwide. Will you play it safe, or will you wake up, step up, and speak out? Like Nelson Mandela did for South Africa and the world, we need a radical new way to think, act, and lead, leading boldly into the future. Join host Anne Pratt, a Harvard Fellow and multi-awarded businesswoman, and unlock the best version of yourself to revolutionize leadership with what the world needs now.
Greetings to all you future bold leaders. Thank you for joining us from around the world. My name is Anne Pratt. I'm formerly from South Africa, and I relocated abroad to attend a Harvard Leadership Fellowship in beautiful Boston in the United States of America. Our bold leader today joins us from Johannesburg in South Africa on the southern tip of the African continent. She's a shopkeeper's daughter who is no stranger to hard work, serving others, and living and leading with humble, clear values. In her 30 plus years in the corporate world, she has served on multiple multinational, multi-listed company boards listed on the London, the New York, and the Johannesburg stock exchanges, including the big global mining giant, Anglo American. She sat on the PLC London listed board. She was chairperson of the South African Management Board, and she is also the former president of the Minerals Council of South Africa. In her previous position, she was an exec director and executive vice president for strategy and sustainability for another global giant, Sasol Limited, an energy and chemicals company. Other boards she served on included the Johannesburg Stock Exchange Limited and the International Women's Forum of South Africa. She has received multiple accolades, including the Financial Mail Most Influential Businesswoman. And in her former life, she was the president and managing director of the Black Management Forum in South Africa. She's a respected authority on transformation and empowerment, the upliftment of women and diverse previously marginalized groups. She is the author of Boardroom Dancing, Transformation Stories from a Corporate Activist. And in her spare time, she spends quiet, reflective time in bed with books. We warmly welcome Nolitha Fakude and welcome to Leading Boldly into the Future. Nolitha, my friend, it's always such a joy to speak to you. It's been such a long time, but I'm so happy and blessed that you're coming to have this conversation today, to share your remarkable stories. And my goodness, there are many of them, and to share your insights and wisdom around leadership and leading boldly into the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Anne, for thinking of me and including me in this amazing journey that you are embarking on. It's been a long while since we last saw each other because we are far away from each other, but I'm really excited to see what you are really working on. And thanks again for inviting me to be part of this process.
Fantastic. And you know, Nolitha, I was so excited when I saw that you had published your wonderful book about boardroom dancing and transformational stories told through the eyes and mind and heart of a corporate activist. I thought a wonderful place to begin would be, how do you define a corporate activist? What is your definition of that?
Well, in South Africa, for me particularly, being a corporate activist is someone who knows that when you come within the corporate environment, you are there as a change agent. Started working in 1990 in South Africa. So this was literally 6 months after Nelson Mandela came out of prison. So I knew as a Black person coming into the world of work that I was there as part of the transformation journey, and therefore was there representing others who were not there. And for me, the journey that I had and many others of my generation was about how do we transform and change the culture within corporate South Africa to be all inclusive and also make sure that Black people and women like myself would find a home in.
Takes me back, Nolitha. I remember the first time we met when you were still managing director of the Black Management Forum in South Africa, those years ago. But then I remember your wonderful keynote when you were president of the Black Management Forum and came and spoke at the launch for Totsi and I, Totsi Mamela, my dear friend, when we launched Mamela Pratt and Associates. And I remember the passion that you shared around this journey of transformation and change. We did work together as well on exactly this topic, boardroom dancing, how do boards transform? And that's not only relevant for South Africa, that is relevant in many, many countries, including the United States of America. What is your key premise in your book, Boardroom Dancing? What is the key message in that?
So, as you know, and in each organization or institution, there is a different culture. And as a board member and a leader going into that organization, you always find different styles of leadership in present or cultures that are actually dominating. And for me, as again, a Black South African who was coming into the white corporate environment in the boardrooms, I came with a mindset that was saying, for us, we used to dance on the streets and toy in protest to want to be included. So when you come inside the boardroom, what is your toy? And the toy I could think of was, I suppose the analogy was, you actually do boardroom dancing. So you come to one boardroom and you find that the dance or the culture there is the waltz. So how do you then engage within that culture in a way that you are still able to state who you are and what you stand for? And also, very importantly, when we think about boardroom dancing, there are fundamental steps in any dance. And those are fundamental steps, whether you're doing a waltz or a cha-cha-cha, for example.
Yeah.
And therefore, for me, from a transformational perspective, the fundamental steps that I talk about in the book are about values, knowing who you are and what you stand for, and more importantly, to always lead based on principles and values. And also remember that you bring with you an implicit agenda of those who are not there on the table or within the boardroom.
That's wonderful. And I have to ask you, being a lead dancer or being a follower, so can you draw that distinction for us in terms of dancing and being the lead dancer? How is that different for you and the experience you've had in boardrooms, not only in South Africa, you've served on PLC boards of companies listed on the London Stock Exchange as well. What is the distinction between being the lead dancer or leading and following?
Oh, definitely. There's a huge difference. And I'm a strong believer that there's always situational leadership that we find wherever we are in an organization or an institution. And depending on the issue on the table, for me, and also how strongly I feel about the issue, then that's when you decide, am I going to be the one who defines the rules of how we conduct the engagement? Or am I going to first understand what are the rules that are at play within this organization? And when you understand those and the values also that are at play, you see which ones resonate with you that you want to support and champion, and also which ones you feel that it's important to challenge. But having said that, you find that in some organizations, you come in and you find already colleagues who are passionate about the same issues that you're passionate about.
Of course.
And therefore, you support them and make sure that you amplify and continue to support that particular agenda as part of a collective. So for me, the whole leading and following, and sometimes really just being there to cheer on the others, is all also about the whole activity of being in a boardroom.
You know, Nolitha, it's such an important conversation, this. I know that you have really been a remarkable trailblazer in South Africa. Can you take us back to a specific moment in time that was a really tough, difficult moment for you? You know, you've mentioned that as a Black woman, you know, often you're the only person of color and sometimes the only woman around the table. Is there a specific transformational story you can share with us, your own story? What time and place, which organization? How did you feel at the time? And then how did you navigate out of that? How did you transform that?
Well, plenty of those to think of. Let me pick up one which I've spoken about publicly, because then that way we are on safe ground, so to speak. As you say, when I was elected as the national president of the Black Management Forum in 2003, not only was I getting into the organization that had been in existence for 27 years, I was also coming in as the first woman to be the president of the organization. And obviously, I could not have made it that far had it not been for my colleagues nationally who had voted for me and elected for me to become the president. And the presidential term, you had 2 terms of office of 3 years of two terms. And the intention was always that coming in, I would continue to champion the agenda of women empowerment in terms of inclusion in the economy. However, during that period, because being the national president was a non-executive role, I was also an executive director elsewhere. And at the time, I was the executive director at Sasol, which is a huge multinational company, also listed on the New York Stock Exchange and also the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So here I was really with 2 chunky roles that I had to work through, besides the fact that the Black Management Forum as an organization at the time was also transitioning to reflect what was happening in the country in terms of the politics of the country, you know, the changes from President Thabo Mbeki to President Zuma. So there was a lot that was required for me as the leader and also to be part of these engagements. And I felt that at the time when my first term of office came to an end, that I was still ambivalent about whether I continue for the second term or not. And I felt I had left it for too long to decide. And eventually, by the time I was making the call to say, actually, I cannot take on the second term of office because I've got this other challenge from a work perspective, there were other dimensions and discussions that were already bubbling within the organization that were actually causing us to be dysfunctional, because from the center.
And sorry, can you just share a couple of examples of those, just so we could understand the context?
Yes. So the issues of succession was the big issue. So who would then be the leader, the next president of the organization? And because when you work within an organization like that, where you elect people from the regions broadly, and then they come through to the national role, you do have to talk to your stakeholders. You need to lobby. You need to advocate for the candidates. But because I was preoccupied with my own personal issues, the organizational issues of succession within the Black Management Forum were taking second space. And as a result, by the time I was trying to now catch up with that bus, it was too late, and too late for me to influence who and what type of a leader should be part of the organization. And more importantly, the role of women in the organization and continuation with the gender agenda, for me, was one of those moments I felt that I had let myself down in terms of my own commitment to this particular agenda, but also let down a lot of other people who had hoped that going forward, the organization would see more women in positions of leadership. I just didn't communicate early enough my intentions of not continuing as a president of the organization. It took us as the organization, the BMF, quite a long time, almost another 6 years to turn things around.
Just briefly, how did you turn that around? What were the key steps and what can we learn from that?
So part of turning that process around for me was to make sure that by the time I left the organization at the end of my term, I still had made it very clear to any leader within the organization that I was committed still to the organization and fully supportive of its values and what the organization stood for. Yeah. So regardless of whether I was formally in a position or not, that I would still continue to support the organization. So at a personal crisis level, so I had made that personal commitment and I followed it through secondly by making sure that the new leadership knew that I was there. I continued to attend functions when I was invited. Yeah. I continued to make sure that I championed the programs that they were running. And I also continued to challenge them on certain issues as colleagues and as peers when there were issues that I felt were not appropriate. I remember there used to be issues that come up on newspapers that were talking about what the organization had said about a particular topic that I know and I knew that was not in line with who we were as an organization. And I would call the leader, this is not who we are. This is not what we stand for. And where possible, let us sit down and have conversation and call in other former presidents. And as a result, we ended up, for instance, forming an advisory committee of former presidents and stalwarts of the organization to almost be the sounding board for the new board and also the subsequent boards. And that advisory board is still there today. It's not a formal structure. It doesn't have formal recognition from a constitutionality, but it's a very powerful body for the organization. And all the presidents since then have used it to engage with us when they believe that there's a matter that needs to be dealt with, or even just to sound off a particular issue.
That's a wonderful example of how through difficult adversity comes opportunity. I'm curious, you said within 6 years you turned it around. How did you measure the turnaround 6 years down the line? What were your measurements of success in terms of we've got to where we want to be in terms of the turnaround? How did you measure it? How did you feel then?
For an organization like that one, the issues were really around feeling and the sentiment that was out there rather than anything else, because 6 years before, the sentiment within members and also other stakeholders externally were very disappointed around where the direction that the organization was taking. There were concerns around the role of women and participation and visibility of women within the organization. And so the turning around, again, you go back to the sentiment in terms of understanding whether the level of credibility with stakeholders is still as high as it was before. Actually, it's even better because we even brought in younger people. There are young people who are leaders. And again, within the context of Mandela, as one would reflect, I kept on going back to the point of thinking when Mandela decided that he was only going to serve one term as president, when he could have served 2 terms. He was allowing younger leaders to come through and new leaders to come through and also be in a position to support them as an elder statesman. And that's what, for me, the lesson and the aha has been to say, you can still play a role within an organization without a formal position.
Of course.
And also be in a position where you're able still to influence and support and shape the future and the strategies of those organizations if you are connected and are seen to be a constructive part of the organization.
Was that measured in a form of surveys? I mean, in terms of measuring the shift? How did you measure that? Or was it just general feedback, anecdotal feedback?
Yeah. So unfortunately, we don't do formal surveys for such business associations, because really it's an association. But it's more anecdotes and also feedback. And also the feedback that we receive as individuals or even the organization from key stakeholders in government, from key stakeholders in civil society, in labor, and in business. We measure it by also seeing how corporate membership, for instance, of the organization over the years has increased in terms of the support, and how younger people and women are visible, as I say, in leadership. Now you find that most of the provinces and the regional chairpersons or branch chairpersons are women in the organization. And that has been part of that measurement. I mean, there's still a disappointment for me that 45 years later, or at least not 45 years later, I would say 15 years later since I was last president, that we still don't have another woman president within the organization. So there's still some work to be done there.
Well, there's some lobbying to do, Nolitha. There's some lobbying to do. Something that struck me, and I remember at the time people were quite surprised, and I think this is an important point. A lot of people, I don't think, know that the Black Management Forum was in fact open to all. I was actually a member of the Black Management Forum.
You were a member? Yes.
I was a member. And, I think this is an important point, because a lot of people don't realize or perceive that the Black Management Forum is in fact open to all races. Can you just briefly talk to the point as to why it was important for the Black Management Forum, firstly, to be open to all races, and secondly, what is the significance of having multiple cultures, races represented in the forum to help with the transformational agenda of an organization like the Black Management Forum?
Yeah, I think that's really an important question. So one, we've got to think back to when the BMF Black Management Forum was which was 1976.
Yeah.
And for South Africa in 1976, we know a lot was happening politically. And the Black professionals who came together were mostly those who were working for multinationals that were based in South Africa. So people like Eric Mafuna, Roel Khoza, and many others.
Peter Wundler, a number.
These were members of the BMF. And the companies that had employed them under the affirmative action principles, really, at the time. And over the years, before even 1990, the Sullivan Code principles, which were from the US, were adopted by multinationals that were operating in South Africa.
Yeah.
So, and those were really around fairness, equality, and inclusion and diversity. And the BMF's vision and commitment is to leadership development of Black professionals so that they are prepared to become leaders in corporate when the opportunities present themselves. And secondly, and fundamentally, is that around the change management, to change the culture of organizations as change agents wherever they go. And to do that, that you need to change the culture. We're talking about boardroom dancing, you need allies, you need partners. And for the BMF, the issue of non-racialism was important then and still is important. And therefore, membership has always been open to all South Africans, or anyone for that matter, who aspires and supports the vision and the values of the BMF, and also is an ally to transformation and change. So people like yourselves and many other white compatriots in South Africa supported the BMF not only as members, but sponsored and helped with mentorship and coaching. When you and Totsi Memela formed the joint venture, the company
Anne Pratt.
Memela Pratt, yes, which was a search firm.
Yeah.
That was also an important step because you were using your organization to identify Black talent that would ordinarily not have been seen or accessible to corporates in the country. And you were showcasing these talented people and placing them in key senior positions in the country. And you were coaching a lot of people. I know you did a lot of mentorship. You coached and mentored me quite a lot. And then I do know that you did the same to many others.
You know, Nolitha, I mean, your career has been remarkable. You know, as you've said, you've transitioned through from the amazing work of the Black Management Forum that, you know, you were doing remarkable change programs and stuff at the time, right on to boards of internationally listed companies. For you as this corporate activist, you know, to what extent are you still this corporate activist? And to what extent, what are the big challenges that keep you awake at night in terms of, and perhaps specifically from a corporate point of view? Because the corporate world, who holds the power of the purse, has often been, you know, a critical stakeholder at the table. What are the big corporate leadership challenges that you think corporates could and should address? And what keeps you awake at night? What conversations do you still bring to the table that you think corporates ought to be addressing?
Yeah, I think nowadays, and it's even much more, I'll say a little bit easier, or maybe it's because of age that I feel it's getting easier to become a corporate activist than it was many years ago, in that we've got a lot of governance standards and principles that are in place today that ensure that even as a board member, if you're a non-executive director, on a corporate board, or even as an executive, you do have some frameworks that support you championing the inclusion and diversity, for example. Secondly, if we're talking about the future sustainability of the world, today we are talking about the issues of ESG, which is environment, social, and governance. And those issues are around being a corporate activist, even internally, to make sure that as a board member, you still continue to ask the difficult questions to management and of management in terms of, are we having programs that, for example, support young people or young entrepreneurs or women? Or do we have programs that support communities in a way that will leave a long-lasting impact in terms of social support and social impact? We also have frameworks like the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, SDGs 2030. Those frameworks today make it easier as a board member, because your voice becomes even much more louder, because you are able to say, we are not complying, or if we're complying to some of these codes and principles, how do we make sure that we become the best, or we lead in a particular area? And for me, the areas that, again, that keep me awake at night is the area around bringing in young leaders into key senior roles operationally, and also women into those positions. because we look at the stats in most of the top 100 listed companies on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, we still have a handful of women CEOs.
Yeah.
And that situation has got to be dealt with because there are enough competent, qualified, and experienced women who can be leaders in those positions.
What do you think the barriers are? Why do you think there is still this resistance? And is there an example where you've been able to break through those barriers to get a woman CEO elected?
I will talk more broadly about the barriers, but I mean, getting women CEOs elected, it's also about how the board itself sees its own commitment to transformation and change, and how you make sure that not only do you demonstrate that through the policies that you have, but also by holding management accountable. So when you are on a search for a particular role, to be clear in what you are looking for. And if you are not able to come up with the kind of specification you are looking for, to be able to push back. And I find that most instances, not only the goodwill, but sometimes just the kind of politeness that happens around the boardroom.
Yeah.
People just kind of say, okay, we'll look at it next time. But more and more, we're finding that because shareholders and stakeholders are asking the question about gender equality, around pay equality, fair pay, and all those other issues around the ESG, it's actually driving the behavior of management to deliver to those issues. So one of the barriers, which for me for a long time had been a bugbear, was the fact that this activism was found in pockets based on individuals and how passionate they felt about issues. But seeing that now even the shareholders are asking the questions, the tone at the top is changing. So if you ask me what are the issues that keep me awake at night still today, it's around the future talent. Do we have the right talent in terms of leadership? And also the future talent, it's not only just about the race and gender today, it's also about the competencies. Do we have the right type of leaders who have the values and of integrity, who have the values of being leaders who are global leaders, and leaders who are also allowing themselves to be vulnerable so that they can be able to lead the change that is required in the different organizations that they run. So even how we develop leaders in organizations or even in academic institutions is as important as it was many years ago, because then those leaders that today are in the pipeline should be set up to be the kind of leaders who will be thinking about the future more than the short-term type of leaders. Because leaders who think about the future think about talent, think about who is going to sustain this organization for the next 100 years. They think about their practices in terms of the ESG issues, and we need those type of leaders to build resilience of our organizations into the future.
You know, that's so important. And Nolitha, you know, we both share a great love and passion for our beloved Nelson Mandela, or Madiba, as we called him. You've referenced him earlier in our conversation today. Do you think Madiba's leadership, example, and competence is still relevant today? And if so, why?
Madiba's leadership competences are still relevant for all of us, in that he had the kind of values systems that are universal, that are hopefully timeless. I mean, moral courage is a very important value system that one has to have, because we have to have courageous conversations as a leader with your stakeholders, whether it's unions, whether it's communities, whether it's employees or shareholders, and to have those courageous conversations with humility, with integrity, and also with a genuine belief and knowing that you want to build bridges or change the status quo is something that's important. And for me, that's one of those reasons I'm saying the leaders of the future, even in business, having and embodying those types of leadership competencies is important, because business leaders today engage with governments of the day, locally and globally.
Yeah.
And if as a leader, you are not able to engage with other leaders, whether it's government or in business, in a way that enhances their relationship from a courageous conversation perspective, but also from an integrity perspective, and also saying what is the win-win for all of us, you are not going to be the leader of the future.
Yeah. What's been on my mind quite a lot, and I was actually having a conversation recently with Thuli Madonsela as well, who has been an incredible moral compass and authority for South Africa in her former position as public protector, but continues to be a moral compass in many ways, not only for South Africa, but setting a tone internationally. One of the things that she was talking about, which I'm curious to hear your response, how in today's times, many leaders have lost their way. There's been an erosion of values that you've spoken about as well. How do we turn that tide? How do we reshift? And what have you done, or can you give us an example where you have been able to halt a trend of self-orientated values, looking after me and my materialistic image versus being of service to the stakeholders and the people out there who have put us in positions of power, or people who depend on us as directors of companies? What are those strategies to stop the current trend of me versus the empowerment and the service of we? Do you have an example? Have you done that before? How do we do that?
I'm so happy that you continue to engage with our sister Thuli Madonsela, because she's just an amazing point of anchor for many of us in leadership.
Yeah.
Because of how she carried herself when she was a public protector, but also how she continues to challenge all of us to always seek to do the right things as leaders. And so the conversation around values for me, it's a fundamental and an important value conversation, even at a personal level. And when I documented my journey through the book, one of the intentions was actually to have conversations with young people.
Yeah.
To say, let's have these conversations around the values and the journey, and more importantly, about the identity of who we would like to be as South Africans and be seen as in the world and also amongst ourselves. And the identity has got everything to do with the values, what to stand for, what you believe is reflected and therefore represents you, and having those conversations. And I'm not even selling the book. One of the chapters, just the last chapter, talks. It's titled "We Need to Talk."
Yes.
And for me, it's about the fact that dialogue is important. So having workshops, I've had the opportunity of meeting a lot of young people through book clubs. And it's amazing how it's worked during COVID lockdown, because I never realized how many book conversations you could have with groups of 20, 30, 40 young people or athletics team and different people to talk about really the value system. And with COVID-19, for instance, one of the topics globally that everyone had been talking about was the fact that COVID has actually brought to the surface all the inequalities that we see in the world. And it goes back then to the values. And that opportunity for me is always then to say to the young people, so what are the values that you believe are important. So the values of Ubuntu, which means broadly for you are because we are, and also that no man is an island. So we cannot be successful in isolation. And also very important that we need to continuously engage across the generations to understand and reach out to others to understand where are they coming from, so that we're able to talk about whether the future is common or not, and what is that shared future. The young people are much more clearer about what the future should be, not about. They want a future that is much more inclusive than before. They want a future that has got more inclusive economic growth. They want a future that is less unequal, more fairness and justice. So those kind of fundamental principles. And in there, so when we think about, so what does that mean? It comes back to the issue of then with all these young people, how do we then engage them in conversations that will help shape their leadership thoughts and styles for the future? So I engage with young people through the BMF also still. We have student chapters, so I engage with those. I envy people like Prof. Tulima Donsela, because she engages with young people, I think, all the time. Yeah. And that two-way engagement also helps people of my generation to think differently and also understand what is it that we as leaders are expected and should be expected to do if we don't think that we should be doing, to do it differently.
Well, Nolitha, I want to pause you there because, you've really struck on an important point. It's one thing, and it's super encouraging that young leaders have these values, all the values you've currently spoken about. Very often young people look up to our generation and say, okay, but what are you folks doing? So I guess my question very briefly is, what is it that our generation ought to be doing differently? People who are good people, who exemplified many of those values, and somehow, as they've moved up the wealth scale, have kind of lost sight of that. Young people look up and say, hang on, you're indulging in all these luxuries that are more self-serving. And not to say one shouldn't have luxuries that one enjoys, but one should have a semblance of balance and responsibility, and one should be the example. So what is it we should be saying to our generation around the fact that, hang on, let's not forget where we came from. Let's remember those core values that helped us in this fight for transformation and liberation, and let us still continue to live and act and lead in a way that pays tribute to those values. What is it we should be saying to our generation, and what is it we should be doing to transform this trend?
Wow, so many people, especially the younger generation, talk about the inaccessibility of people of our generation. Yeah. They say we never get to talk to you, we never get to engage with you because we read about you or we see you on the media. And so one of the things that we have to continue to do as leaders to be accessible, and accessibility either through these types of podcasts that you're doing or going out, plowing back into the community, because when you are accessible, you have an opportunity to have conversations with people, young people who ask the question, how did you get here? Because the question that most young people still have today is, how did people get to where they got to? And if they do not understand the struggle, if they don't understand the journey that the role models or the visible people have gone through over the years, then they think that the quick way of going about it is to emulate the people who get that way through corruption, because there's no other narrative out there. So I'm afraid one of the basics is really to continue to be visible within communities, to go back to the schools and communities where there are younger people and other people and engage.
And engage on a more personal one-on-one
on a personal level and listen, because also by listening.
Yeah.
So you don't engage to go and tell people, do not do this. You go and listen, because by also listening more, you are able to understand and read where everybody is at, so that whatever interventions we put in place as government, as civil society, as business, or as general as society, then are the right interventions. Because we could be saying there's a lot of, there's a perception, it becomes too anecdotal, because people say, well, I want to go and live by the sea and all that, because that's what I'm seeing on Twitter or social media. Mm-hmm. But if they're not having conversations with real people rather than people behind the screen, we are not going to have the conversation. So I do encourage still that we participate in organizations. There are organizations like the International Women's Forum, which we both belong to. There, as leaders, we need to be out there. There are other organizations, coaching, mentorship, being there and being accessible to
and available. How have you anchored your values, Nolitha? I mean, you've climbed up that ladder, and I want to come back to that a little later, but how have you anchored your values? You are consistently a woman of moral courage, authority, and integrity. What practically do you do to anchor those values and to keep you committed and disciplined to those values in your daily life and your daily leadership?
I come from a generation, or from my mother, who would say to you every day, make sure that you are not the kind of person that when someone sees you and asks who is that person, that you are actually going to be embarrassed to say, I am Nolitha and I'm so-and-so's daughter.
Yeah.
And so that's one. But having said that, I think surrounding yourself with the people who keep you grounded is important, because the people who keep you grounded and challenge who you are and what to stand for are the people who know you best and are your friends, are your family, and people who've known you for a long time. And also allowing yourself to be vulnerable. I believe every day I struggle with keeping my true North Star in many decisions that I make as a leader. Okay, what has worked and what has not worked, because I do that almost on a daily basis, and it drives me crazy, because sometimes I beat myself up a lot for many things. But when I do that, at least I can say that decision was made based on principles.
Yeah.
And if you do not know what are those principles that hold you together as a person, then it becomes difficult. And just continuing to spend time in reflection. You know, I've come to appreciate more and more the fact that being able to reflect inwardly around just being by yourself and reflect on where you are at as a person and where to around the future helps.
How often do you do that? I mean, do you have a ritual? Do you?
I have rituals that I don't think are the normal. For instance, most people say they think best when they are in the shower. My ritual is to sit in bed and surround myself with books and believe that all that information will come through. So I really cocoon a lot. I spend time in
bed with books.
In bed with books and it just gives me a sense of contemplation. And also my spiritual life is also important.
Yeah.
I do have my spiritual practices that I engage in.
Can you share some of them?
Just being able to acknowledge with gratitude whether it's, for me, it's my ancestors. Over the years, I continue to talk to them, talk to my grandmothers and shout at them, and also laugh with them and ask them, is this what this is all supposed to be about on any issue? But for you to be able to do that, you need to know that it's like having that relationship. So that has been one of my anchors, really talking to my grandmothers. I have grandmothers that are very special, and now more others that I continue to talk to.
That's wonderful. And what is your definition of vulnerability? How can you share with us? I mean, people use this word, and for so long people have perceived that being vulnerable is weakness instead of a strength, and that there's a shift in that thinking. What is your definition of vulnerability? And can you give us a brief example of how that vulnerability has shown up at some point?
Vulnerability for me is being more about self-awareness and being able to talk to others and say, I don't know, or help me. I don't have all the answers. As a leader, also being in a position to be able to say, I'm sorry when you've made a mistake, and ask for people's inputs. As a leader, to be able to say to people, I don't have all the answers, give me your inputs. That's also part of that vulnerability. Yeah. So for me, that's a very key skill and competence that is required for future leaders. Yeah. Because only when people around you realize then that you are open to receiving feedback and also to getting inputs, will they be able to give you those inputs, knowing that then it won't be a career limiting move, or also that it won't get them into trouble. But vulnerability in leadership is and in life generally is being able to say, I actually don't have all the answers. And of course, as I'm sitting here with you this afternoon, I also feel like I don't have all the answers to some of the questions that you're asking.
Yeah. Nolitha, you alluded to your relationship with your mother. Can you take us back in time to a childhood defining moment? Just briefly, a childhood defining moment. What was that for you?
For me, my father passed away when I was 8 years old, and my mother was widowed, and she was 28 years old. And as the eldest child, I had to start helping her and supporting her at home. And it meant that I started working as an 8-year-old. And for me, that changed my life, because we ran a general dealer shop at home. And it meant that I worked in the shop when I was 8 years old.
Yeah. You've spoken, I mean, that is an incredibly powerful example of indelibly imprinting hard work, all sorts of things, and also dealing with great losses. And I'm really sorry about those losses at such a young age. Talking about Mandela, what was your Mandela moment?
For me, it still goes back to when he retired earlier than we all wanted him to.
Yeah.
Because he was a leader who was at the top of his game, really, truly at top of his game, and him leaving power behind. And that, again, is a lesson for all of us as leaders to know when to leave. And also make sure that when you step back and you leave on a high note.
And leave on a high note. Very powerful, and so many people out there could take stock of that. What final thoughts do you want to leave us with?
And for me, the issue of being accessible as a leader is important, because by being accessible, it means that you don't lose touch with the ordinary people. As leaders, the minute we forget the day-to-day reality of ordinary employees and communities, it's the day we lose touch and make the wrong decisions. So his humility and accessibility is something that I really admire.
Nolitha, thank you so much for your accessibility, for your vulnerability. I so look forward to sharing more with you. Do come back again. But bless you. Keep up your amazing work in the world. Keep dancing in those boardrooms. We need more corporate activists like you. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Anne, and all the best for you too. Lots of love.
I love Nolitha's book title, her construct, and her leadership analogy. Leadership is a dance. Whether you're totoing in the streets of South Africa, in Iran, in the United States, in China, or anywhere, in a nightclub, in a ballroom, or even if you've stepped onto the balcony to watch the dance and to get a better big picture view. It could be a dance of anger. It could be a dance of intimacy. It could be a tribal rain dance of thanksgiving and praise and hope. Being a young dancer myself and on a city hall stage from an early age, dancing with the top ballet company, where at age 3, I could certainly move and step, but I often missed a beat. I learned that leadership, like dance, is a partnership. It's give and take, and it's often hard work. But when we move with the groove, we can energize, we can galvanize, and we can mobilize while uplifting ourselves and others too. Like the global hit song, Jerusalem, which sparked a worldwide dance challenge and took the world by storm at the height of the global pandemic. Leadership, like dance, can ignite and unite. It was a call to connect, to move and step. It was a global dance, a global movement, a global call for action, for change. Or like the Japanese football fans that clean up after their FIFA World Cup matches, and while dancing the night away, celebrating their win over Germany, they still practiced their leadership dance and their Japanese culture, atarime, to clean up and leave the space and place a little cleaner and a little better than they found it. So in this dynamically changing world, let's move with the groove and let's dance to this new beat, whether it be in your communities, in the halls of Parliament or Congress, or in your corporate boardrooms, whether it be in your schools, in your universities, or on your football fields. And even if you're feeling a little shy or are not yet totally sure how, together with your team, with your dance company, you can get up and dance and lead. So until next time, remember that leading boldly is about making thoughtful, clear choices. It's about bigger and better thinking. And bold leadership is about taking bold action, just one small dance step at a time. One small step for you, but together, a global dance for humanity. So come back soon, share with your friends, and join this global dance movement for change. Because if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? Take care and take joyful, bold action.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leading Boldly into the Future. Please find links and connections mentioned in this show in our blog and never miss an episode by subscribing at anne-pratt.com. That's ANNE-PRATT.com. May these insights from inspiring industry leaders, remarkable disruptors, and courageous champions of change bring forth a brand new you, emboldened, empowered, and ready to inspire hope. Come back soon, share with your friends, sign up on anne-pratt.com and join our movement for change. Why? Because the world needs you to lead boldly too.